Good morning.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. For a second, I'm going to get started right away with you while the Eric's team is I think getting situated. Okay, good day, everyone. Thank you for joining. For those that are presenting online, please turn on your mics and videos so Chris can finalize your audio and video setup. We will start exactly at 1:45 p.m. I'm hoping to see Claudia soon in the conference room, but why don't we use this time to have Chris work with you since we're all here.
Hi. I'll just go ahead and start with Stephen. Can I hear your audio really quick?
Good morning from New York City.
Okay, excellent. You sound good. Your positioning's pretty good. If there's any way we could maybe lean your webcam down just a hair, we're getting a little bit of a good amount of ceiling behind you.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, that looks great. Perfect. And then Pranab, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. Now I can hear you. I just wanted to make sure your audio is working. Your shot is a little bit of a low.
What is it? It has started.
Oh, it has started. Yes.
I'm there.
Flatten that
Okay.
camera just a little bit. Maybe put a book under there if we had
Hello.
to.
Nice to meet you. How are you doing? Fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Let's see. We don't have Amos's camera yet. And looks like that's it for our speakers for now. So I'll hold off until we get a few more.
Hey, I'm sorry. We have only 400 places, and we are already.
Is there a way to make me host?
So I'm not allowed to sell any more tickets. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they said that they're messaging us. They said that they will start soon.
Are you paid for it?
We can start off.
I don't know.
Just wait. Stephen, while I have you, just letting you know that we do have your final PowerPoint
You
slide.
paid for it? Thank you. Do you have a name for me?
Say, I hope also same for me.
You're one of the chairs.
Same for me. Because
Yes, yes, I
Thank you.
believe so.
Thank you.
Yeah. What I can do is email, so if you check your email inbox, I'll send the master slide if you can look through it, because I don't know how quickly
No,
we'll be able to
unfortunately, you did not pay for
test it here.
the dinner. Okay. So at the moment, I'm not allowed to.
Yeah, I don't know because I don't know the payment.
So say you've requested
Yeah.
that I become host.
Not
Yeah,
yet.
yeah.
Haven't been able to connect with them just yet.
Okay. Are
Yep.
is anyone on the other end that could hear us?
What I can do is put it in the chat message, since one of them is messaging us on chat.
Oh, okay.
We make Jamin host, please.
Okay.
Oh, okay, there you go. Oh, my text got looking funny.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here so promptly. I'm going to continue with my notes. It'll be very short. I think it'll be best to do so. Please turn off your camera when you're not speaking. Please turn on your camera during Q&A so that you are presented as our virtual panel. 5 minutes before the start of the session, we ask everyone to be silent here so that we can allow people to come into the room physically, in person, and virtually. Towards the end of the presentation, if you could remain silent for 2 more minutes so that we can complete the report. If you need to leave before the end of the seminar, please let me know. And if you need to do so, please exit quietly. No need for farewells. The Trip and Tag will be running a master slide that has all your slides in order. Please prompt them by saying, next slide, please. Claudia will do her best to keep time, but we ask that you would manage your time as closely as possible. And during Q&A, please turn on your cameras, and I'm gonna quiet now. Thank you.
I'm already in the meeting.
Any questions from our virtual panelists? Okay. I will send the master slides now. Please check through your slides carefully.
Slides. I'm sorry, how are they being sent?
I'm sending it in our virtual speaker group email that we've been using this morning. I just pushed send, so it'll be very
Okay.
short.
Thank you.
Charlotte's saying, please send link. Could you guys help me, Chris and Jamin, what she might mean by please send the link? Do you think she doesn't have the panelist link?
Possibly. I didn't see Sujana's email at first either, so let me forward that to her.
Okay. I'm hoping she will be able to join in person. Okay, I am bringing you guys into this email chain. It might be about a link for, there's been a request. Oh, Amos, from what I understand, Charlotte and Claudia have determined that it might be a little bit too close to the event time for us to invite your colleague. I believe your colleague's name is Ishan Agrawal. I'm sorry, but we're actually unable to support. We just don't have control to be able to get a panelist link to him at this point. I hope you understand.
Hmm.
We have everyone turn their cameras on, please. So all of the panelists, yeah, good. Okay, and Amos? Okay, excellent. And Chris, we have an audio test for everyone. Everyone's good?
I have not done Amos's yet.
Let's do the audio, just do another round of audio to make sure things sound good on our side.
Sure. Amos, do you mind unmuting your mic when you have a moment? Just so I could hear your audio.
Good afternoon. You can hear me?
Yep, nice and clear. Okay, sounds good. And the shot's accurate, so we should be good to go with these three, Jamin.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great. And just Stephen, good morning.
Hi.
I'm gonna ask if you could raise your camera up a little bit. We just want to make sure that your camera lens is at eye level so that you're not looking down or up. So sometimes what that requires is a book. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you. Perfect. All good from our side. And Sehi, quick question. Anyone else joining us virtually, or is this the group?
This is the group. These are the 3 speakers.
Okay.
Steven.
And could we test the slides to make sure we can present those?
Yeah, let me message Tripantag's team to pull up the master. It's on their computer. Download it to the computer.
All right. So they will be the ones presenting the slides.
Yes.
Okay. Just confirming. Just want to confirm that.
Say and Jamed, I think Ishan is also joining. I had written to Ishan Agrawal from FES. He will not be speaking, but he will be there. And in any case, there is any question related to Foundation for Ecological Security, so he might be able to respond.
Just I'm not sure if you're receiving more updated decision, but as of about 10 minutes ago, our head of comms and Claudia, the moderators, felt that it was a little too close to the start of the event time. And so we're not able to support getting a panelist link to Mr. Ishan. So it's unfortunately going to be a no, although I'm sure his contributions would have been great, but I don't think we can support that at this time.
Okay, noted.
Thank you.
And Sehi, do we have a confirmation of start time at 7:45?
That's a really good message to send.
Great.
It's 1:45 there.
Okay. I'm gonna start the live stream in like a minute.
Okay.
Just to make sure everything's good on that side.
Yeah, we're not. I wish we could. Oh, great. We can see them. I think that's Charlotte. That's definitely Charlotte. Okay, great. Our face is on the screen. I'm sure they'll want to do in-room audio testing. Visual, we can see. We're at 10 minutes before.
Sehi, can you hear me?
Yes, so wonderful.
I cannot hear you.
Oh, you cannot hear us. Okay. We can hear you. We can definitely hear you.
Hi, Stephen. Hi, Pranab.
Good morning.
Hi, Claudia. Good
We
afternoon
can't
from
hear
India.
you yet. Hi, Amos.
Yeah, we can't. We can hear you. We can hear you.
Hi.
Okay, so the deal, Sehi, is that you guys have to advance the slides, please. Is that possible?
Yes.
Now we hear you. Just be mindful that the whole room is already listening to us.
Understood. Understood.
Thank you.
So you will advance the slides. It's okay for you to do that. So for those of you joining us virtually, when it's your turn to present, we will make sure that your slide deck is up. And then just say next slide when you need to move to the next slide. Okay. And say, do you need anything else in terms of connecting on your side? Is there anything else we still need to do?
Damon, I'm going to ask if you can enable me to share screen. You are the host right now. Can you giving me access to sharing screen? And then I believe you're trying to live stream in the next 30 seconds for testing.
Sorry, I just
yeah,
lost.
so if you can hear me, I'm gonna make you
Janet.
co-host.
Everything is fine. We don't have
Hello.
to test anything. It's okay.
But they have a question for you. Okay,
you can ask me.
here's the guy.
Hi. What is your
Jamie.
question?
Hello.
Hi.
We just want to make sure that we're able to present the slides within Zoom ourselves.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
What's that, Jamin?
So we're going to be so we're going to be presenting our slides for the virtual panelists inside Zoom. So we just want to make sure that Sehi here has the ability to do that, and it looks like she does. Is that Sehi? Are you doing that?
Yes.
So one person of you is sharing the
Okay,
screen.
confirmed.
And, yeah, and then
Sorry, just
Yeah,
to
we got
clarify.
it. So we're
Sehi-
good. Sehi, we're good. Thumbs up.
Sorry, it's not,
Yes. Yes.
it's not just for the virtual speakers, but it's for all the speakers. Is that okay?
yes.
Okay.
Okay, excellent.
All right. Awesome.
We-
We're great.
Could we
perfect.
get,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Super.
could we quickly get the in-person speakers and the virtual speakers to take a look at these slides right now? This is the order of the presentation. I am going to flip through the
Here,
slides.
Claudia. Kommst du kurz? We have Claudia here for now, so she can go through it with you. Just go through the
Question.
slides.
Okay, slide one.
Don't click anything. No.
Sie will jetzt schnell die Slides zeigen. Yes.
Okay, slide 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, they look good.
Make sure they're in the right. We
Okay, do you have any questions? Was everything fine?
It's fine.
Yeah. alles gut?
Okay, Marcella is there. Is Marcella there?
Yes,
Okay,
she's
Marcella. Great. And then
The online
Steven,
speaker, is there a question left or is everything fine?
I think we're good.
I have one last question. When will we start?
We will
We're
start on
starting in
time.
6 minutes. We're gonna start on time.
Yes.
Okay, starting on time. Thank you.
Okay,
You're welcome.
and you cannot speak to us anymore because this is all being heard by everybody in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we can move
Thank
then.
you.
Yeah, we move then. Okay. Okay. Falls irgendwas zwischendurch ist. Es gibt jetzt gleich noch,
Sehi, could you stop sharing the slides, please?
Also so hier. Wir machen eigentlich sonst niemand das wir Q&A machen. Dann sind so ja das. Kann ich von einer Flasche Wasser Ja, ich habe es auch nicht mehr geschafft, was soll das? Aber das ist ein Schluss. Genau. Okay, dann solltet ihr meine Flasche besser.
Wenn Sie aus irgendeinem Grund noch mehrere Leute hier auf der Bühne haben wollen, können Sie diese gerne benutzen. Wir gehen hier hin. Ja.
So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claudia Ringler. I'm the Director of Natural Resources and Resilience at the International Food. A second event in the CGIAR policy seminar series on strengthening food systems, and it focuses on payment for ecosystem services. And it's supported by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. As we all know, farmers provide a range of ecosystem services beyond producing food. They include carbon storage, pollination, as well as cultural and supporting services. But these farmers, pastoralists, fishermen, fisherwomen, they're seldom compensated for the ecosystem services they provide beyond food. And often they're not very well compensated for the food that they produce. So this is a big challenge, because when farmers cannot make meet ends and cannot feed their families, they might potentially destroy ecosystem services or degrade their land and water resources. To address that, a system or an approach called payment for ecosystem services has been introduced several decades ago. There is some evidence that these payments can diversify smallholder farmer earnings and also incentivize more sustainable farming and land management practices. However, while a number of such services or such schemes have been implemented around the world, they have by and large not gained sufficient traction to really make a difference for both farm incomes and environmental outcomes. So in the coming 90 minutes, we will examine past and current ecosystem service payment schemes targeted at smallholders across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. I hope we'll hear about their effectiveness, what their impacts, and explore how such schemes could be taken forward for larger impacts, and also really how these schemes can build greater resilience in food systems. Following an opening set of presentations, we will take both virtual and in-person questions, and we'll have a panel to discuss those. So the big questions I think that we hope to deal with today are, what does it take for these PS schemes to work for both nature and poor people? And what can we do differently, to really make a difference? So now I guess we'll get started. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Jo Swinnen, the Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute and the Managing Director of the CGR Systems Transformation Science Group. Prior to joining CGR, Jo had an illustrious career in Belgium and also at the World Bank and the European Commission. So without further ado, Jo, please, I'll invite you here to the stage to make a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. I think you already gave some very good opening remarks. So let me keep it very brief because we have an excellent lineup of speakers here. I think the topic of today is really important, and I'm also happy that it's really part of our engagement with BMZ, the seminar series, which I think a really important topic of resilience overall. And so it's kind of very fitting, I think, that we could do it here at Tropentag today, where we are together with our German colleagues, and we have a fantastic program here. Well, they have a fantastic program. We are just here part of the program, and I once again want to congratulate the organizers for that. Let me get back briefly on the payment for ecosystem service, why I think it's so important. It's one of these things which should really be at the heart of our food systems transformation and food, land, and water systems transformation, because it's really all about externalities and dealing with it. And so we know that in order to transform these systems, we really have to deal with it. We have to deal with greenhouse gas emissions, with biodiversity loss, etc. And our normal market, our market systems, prices, etc., do not work very well for that. Now, it's one of these things, as an economist, you can derive a perfectly theoretical result on this and things that should work very, very well. You can estimate what the value is. You can calculate what the payment is that you have to give for that, and then you can basically provide an incentive scheme of making it work. What we see is that something which works very well theoretically on the blackboard doesn't work very well in practice. And so one of the points that Claudia already made is that it's not used as much as we want it to happen. And why is that? Because it's very hard to implement. Measurement is a problem, enforcement is a problem, information related to it is a problem. And so the big issue is, how can we implement these schemes, which theoretically would be a wonderful solution for many of the problems that we face. And so I look very much forward today to hear from our researchers and our practitioners who are working with these things, implementing them. And I think really it's where we can learn from success stories. How does it work? How can we expand it? How can we scale it up within countries and to other countries in the world? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you for those opening remarks. And yes, economists are very interested in those schemes, but very clearly we can't make them happen. So I'd like now to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Marcela Quintero. She is the Associate Director General, Research Strategy and Innovation for the Alliance of Biodiversity in CIAT. And she's a Senior Director in the Food Systems Transformation Science Group. Okay, CGR needs to shorten some titles. And she also leads the CGR initiative on agroecology. So that's 3 lines. With a background in ecology and agronomics, she has worked for more than 2 decades on payment for ecosystem services. So we have the expert in the room, watershed management, environmental impacts in agricultural landscapes, and adoption of determinants of sustainable land use-based options with a focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. And she will provide an overview presentation on PS. What is it? How do they work? what kind of evidence do we have? So please, Marcella, come up to the stage, and we look very much forward to your slides. They will be managed externally, and you'll just say next slide. Please,
Okay.
over to you.
Okay, thank you again. Okay, let me start by saying that payment for ecosystem services started emerging more than 20 years ago. And I was very young when I started working on that. And in that moment, there was not a lot of evidence on what could work and what will not work with payment for ecosystem services. After now 20 years or more of evidence that has been emerging since 2025 is where we start seeing most of the scientific publications. Now we have lessons learned, and this is a summary, what I'm going to present today, on some emerging evidence on what can help to make PES effective on the ground. Next. Thank you. So Ingrid, Claudia was saying what is PES, how, and etc. So on the what, I don't want to get into the details of the definition. Here, what I wanted to call your attention is that in the left side, you can see the two most popular definitions on payment for ecosystem services. There are sometimes debate among the authors of these definitions, but here for me, what is important to highlight is that these two definitions highlight three main things. One is that payment for ecosystem services at the end is the negotiation of voluntary willingness to engage in payment for ecosystem services. So it means that there has to be agreement and negotiation between the service providers and the service payers. And also it has to be conditioned to some specific land use decisions that are linked to the delivery of a specific ecosystem services. So it means that in the practice, payment for ecosystem services is not just the result of having, you know, the market, the supply and demand forces of a market acting there, but it's really the result of having high efforts on facilitating reaching those agreements between ecosystem services and ecosystem services providers and payers. And also it's a lot about building trust between those actors. And it's also about reciprocity around those ecosystem services provision. And also I want to say here that payment for ecosystem services born as a mechanism for environmental outcomes. Yes, it can deliver other co-benefits, like for example, contributing to sustainable livelihoods or to increase income for farmers, but the main objective since the beginning has been on environmental outcomes. Next one. So now, as I said, we now have literature that is providing evidence on what is working and on the how, what we should look into if we want to implement payment for ecosystem services based on the empirical evidence and the scientific studies that are emerging now regarding the effectiveness of payment for ecosystem services. So if based on that literature and that evidence, this is, let's say, more or less the different phases that have to be accomplished if we want to implement a payment for ecosystem services scheme. And here I want to call the attention that 25 years ago, we were not calling giving a lot of attention to some key specific aspects that are important at the moment of assessing the feasibility of these schemes. One is land tenure status. The second thing is the willingness to pay and the willingness to accept those payments. And the other one is the institutional or organizational capacity. Next one. And then after the feasibility, these are other key aspects that we have learned that are super important at the moment of implementing PES schemes. And let me start with the box on the right that is on implementation. And I was saying before that having a former sort of organizational structure, wherever we want to implement this payment for ecosystem services, is important because at the end, at the moment of implementing this, you need an organizational structure that is going to be able to formalize arrangement between ecosystem services and ecosystem users and providers. You need to collect the payments, you need to disburse those payments, and also you need a structure that is solid enough to do monitoring and enforcement of that system. So that's why having a present organization, wherever this is going to be applied, is already like a plus, because then you can build that onto that. On the design, is key to understand what are the funding horizons of the payments. And for that, it's important to know what are the sources of those funding resources, could be private or public. Right now, the latest review of payment ecosystem services have shown that, for example, in Latin America, the main source of funding for PES are public funding, while in Africa is mainly private and mainly from abroad, the countries. And the other thing that is important, next one, is that in the design, in theory, as Joe was saying, it's important to understand what is the cost of providing that ecosystem services, to understand where those services are provided the most, so we target the payments to those areas. But in reality, what I put here in these red squares is that these are the things that sometimes in the design are missing or are not built solidly. And also in the implementation, in the reviews and in the most recent reviews, you see that the less we are doing in the implementation is in the monitoring and enforcement. So there is a gap there if we want to support payment for ecosystem services. Next one. So regarding the importance of public funding, this is just an example I have personally been following through the past years. And here I just wanted to highlight that we analyzed what were the bottlenecks to have public funding into payment for ecosystem services in this country. So in 2013 and 2015, these were the cases that we analyzed that were existing in that moment. These are payment for water services. And in 2021, after a law on ecosystem services was created, the cases increased massively. And it was basically because that law allowed water supply companies to collect payments from the water users to be dedicated as payment for ecosystem services. And this triggered the amount of payment for ecosystem services in the country. Next one. So in terms of what we know about environmental performance of payment for ecosystem services, it's very difficult with the evidence that we have now, with the exception of carbon projects, to know if are effective in delivering the ecosystem service. Because what is being monitored in these systems is the land use decision that was linked to the payment, because it was believed that that land use decision was good for the delivery of the ecosystem services. So for example, more forest is going to deliver more water. These kind of assumptions were made. The problem is that some of the payment for ecosystem services selected those land uses to condition the payment, not necessarily based on solid evidence. So this is something where I think research can advance more and make sure that these payment for ecosystem services are founded on solid evidence regarding what land use management options are going to be paid as proxy of the delivery of the ecosystem services. The other thing is that, next one, is in terms of poverty performance. So in terms of poverty performance, even though this is not the main objective of this payment for ecosystem services, the reality is that some agencies has been supporting payment for ecosystem services also as an option to alleviate poverty. There are not many impact studies around that, but there is already some emerging evidence that is showing that at least there are no negative effects on welfare, and also there are more positive impacts on livelihood, especially on financial aspects. And where we don't know much are in the trade-off between income and other livelihood dimensions that could have effects on inequality in the territories where we implement these schemes. Next one. Yeah, so to finalize, I want to focus here on where we can focus the technical and research assistance for payment for ecosystem services. So as I was saying, there is a need, especially for payment for ecosystem services related to watershed services, on providing evidence on what is the impact of the selected land use practices on the actual ecosystem services that are targeted by the schemes. In carbon projects, there is still a gap, especially in the South, for having models of soil organic carbon, because the existing models has not been validated in the South. The greenhouse gas calculators also are based on information that has not been produced in the tropics, for example. So sometimes the emissions that are estimated are above the measurements that has been taken in those countries. So with this, I want to finalize. Thank you, Claudia, and looking forward for the conversation. Thanks.
Excellent. And I think the research strategy around the future of PS schemes will be definitely a topic for discussion. So we hope to hear the remaining points at that stage. So we now have our second speaker, Dr. Felicitas Röhrig. She's a Senior Policy Officer, Division of Sustainable Agriculture Supply Chains, International Agriculture Policy, Agriculture, Rural Development, Innovation at BMZ. Okay, the titles are no different, I realize. And yeah, just Felicitas also has a long career. She was working as a climate policy analyst at CIAT with the CGR CCAFs or Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security Program, and also with the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, which is close by here. And she'll, I think, explain or gives us an overview of a new PS type scheme that the ministry is considering or has started to implement. So we very much look forward to hear about their program. So Felicitas, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And actually, I'm happy to tell you that we realized our titles are too long. So our division is now called Agriculture Rural Development. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank you on behalf of the BMZ for the opportunity to jointly discuss benefits and challenges of payment for ecosystem services with such an esteemed and distinguished panel of experts today. Our agriculture and food systems are expected to provide access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food for all. And yet, more than 3.1 billion people are actually unable to afford a healthy diet. At the same time, shocks of different kinds like the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis, or the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and its implications on global food supply are increasingly putting pressure on the livelihoods of the people working on 570 million farms worldwide. The challenges ahead for agriculture and food systems are enormous. And in order to address them, we require a fundamental transformation, a paradigm shift away from a one-dimensional system that only produces food to a system that provides multifunctional services. Smallholder farmers in the global south make a significant contribution to the preservation of ecosystems and the provision of multifunctional services. But in the current system, they are not rewarded for it. So we need to find adequate compensation mechanisms for farmers to keep up and further incentivize sustainable practices that contribute to maintaining ecosystem services. We want to find mechanisms that allow farmers to generate an income, not only from agriculture production, but also from payments for achieving positive externalities. Such a smart income mix can provide farmers, smallholder farmers, with a living income and contribute to both food security and climate protection. And this is why, under the German G7 presidency, we launched the Compensation Initiative. This initiative has 4 overarching goals. First, we want to increase and diversify the income of smallholder farmers. Second, we want to create incentives for climate and nature-positive agriculture practices. Third, we want to contribute with the initiative to the diversification of financial instruments for payment for ecosystem services schemes. And fourth, we want to also mobilize more international public and private climate finance for small-scale agriculture. So in contrast to what Marcella presented before, our initiative actually has a pro-poor design. So it's going further than just looking at environmental benefits from PES schemes. Now, in the first year of the initiative, we developed a policy brief through which we identified 3 priority areas of intervention. Firstly, to promote technological innovations and redesign payment mechanisms for ecosystem services so that trading of ecosystem service conservation credits can become competitive in smallholder agriculture. Secondly, we want to increase public and private investments, for example, through blended finance programs, to scale up successful payment for ecosystem services programs. And thirdly, we want to support public policy reform in order to create the right enabling environment and establish national frameworks for the implementation of PES schemes. So for us with this initiative, it is about actually moving towards implementation. For this last year, we launched a partnership with IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and provided 15 million euros to pilot different compensation schemes in 3 partner countries. In Brazil, a project is being implemented to establish a financing system for incentivizing deforestation-free value chains. In Ethiopia, they are building a system for carbon certification in agroforestry systems. And in Lesotho, they are developing a national fund for payment for ecosystem services. And under the same partnership with IFAD this year, we have some more exciting collaborations starting with the Rabobank's Smallholder Agroforestry Finance Program. Okay, I'm at the end of my speech. Thank you.
I expect we'll be getting a lot of questions. This is a new program. I think a lot of great opportunities, proactive for pro-poor, and also trying to improve environmental outcomes. So you'll get a lot of questions after, so can answer them right then. We'll now move to our virtual speakers, and we have 3 virtual speakers, which is why we have to keep on time. Stephen Lowry is our first virtual speaker. He's a senior associate in C4's Equity, Gender, and Tenure Research Program. And he does research on the social, economic, and ecological effects of forest rights devolution, and the impacts of land rights formalization on agricultural investments and productivity, and tenure factors affecting adoption of forest landscape restoration practices in Africa, among other topics. He has spent time in many different locations: Wisconsin's Land Tenure Center, Ford Foundation, and many other locations. And yeah, I'll hand over to Steve for the next talk. Please, Steve, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia, and good morning to everyone from New York. If we could have the first slide. Next slide. So, living under Claudia's draconian timekeeping practices, I've decided to summarize everything in my first slide. Anytime I have left over, I'll go into further depth with other slides. So this is really the argument summarized. REDD+ and PES interventions in community forestry, I want to emphasize community forestry, have performed poorly overall, and the evidence pretty much supports that. And when I say poorly, I'm speaking to both ecological and social outcomes. Our main initiatives, programmatic initiatives, including Bond Challenge, for instance, really emphasizes that investments should have jointly positive social and ecological outcomes. So this is key. Now, my next point is, I think, the most important theme, really the most important thing I want to say here to our audience, which is that forest communities, many forest communities, most forest communities know what they're doing. You know, these are the people who do manage these complex social and ecological systems. But local management and stewardship systems are not acknowledged in intervention design sufficiently. Okay. The importance of social goals is lauded, but the roles of local social institutions and priorities are largely overlooked or discounted by REDD+ and PES planners. And this being the case is the beginning of a programmatic failure or lack of certainly expected outcomes. Okay, and I want to speak a little bit here about an important contextual factor, which is, communities manage extremely complex socio-ecological systems for multiple purposes, and we're aware of this: timber, non-timber forest products, water regulation, already of environmental service, agricultural sustainability, biodiversity, environmental services, cultural identity, and social solidarity. Successful stewardship is based, and we see evidence of this in many, many places, on an ethic of care, where there's an understanding that there's a relationship between social well-being and the well-being of our environment. There's profound intrinsic knowledge of the context, the ecological and social institutional context within which people live and work. And this is the arena of decision-making, action, that's effective. And outsiders have a hard time understanding this. And it's even worse when they don't make the effort to understand it. And then the third element in effective stewardship is agency. That is the ability to apply your knowledge and in ways that are respectful of the environmental context. And of course, this is very much dependent on having secure rights. Okay. Now, where good stewardship outcomes are already present, and this kind of points to a conundrum with respect to PES design and its focus on incentives, the carbon balance may be socially and ecologically optimal, and accommodating forest management and payments regimes for carbon additionality may be disruptive. And in fact, there's evidence that suggests that payments potentially, in some contexts, undercut resilience of systems already in balance. Now, the additionality principle, which, you know, in the forestry sector, you're being rewarded for additional carbon produced that would not have otherwise been produced without the payment. The additionality principle, ironically, rewards deforesters. That's a rough term here, and that's, you know, many drivers of deforestation, but rewards deforesters for purposes of discussion while excluding conservers. This is perceived locally in many settings as socially unacceptable. And we're seeing evidence of a response to this, for instance, as suggested by the recent studies of some of the Vera projects undertaken by some colleagues of mine and publicized in The Guardian, that this has led to payments in contexts where there's been reduced additionality that might have been expected because people are managing successfully. They've been included, they've been registered as part of the program. Importantly, another contextual factor, that the lack of market-facing institutions emboldens or can embolden rent-seeking behavior on the part of intermediaries. That is, those who market carbon credits and in some cases forests. We have to remind ourselves that in many settings, the underlying ownership of forest land is in the hands of the state. And so buyers are looking naturally to look to the legally, statutorily recognized owner of forest. And we've seen, we might say, some perverse policy results in this regard. The jury state ownership of forest land positions governments for payment capture. So
okay,
that's
this is
okay.
Excellent. Yes.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide, or is that the end of the my time?
No, this was the end. You did the right.
Thank you very much.
Did it perfectly. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much.
There's a lot more information, and all these presentations will be online and can be shared. But we want some discussion after. So we'll move now to our second online participant. And now we are basically moving deep into Africa. We have Amos Wekesa with us. He's a carbon specialist with the Global Evergreening Alliance, where he's responsible for designing carbon projects, quality assurance, including validation and certification of commitments. And he handles the M&E, which we've heard is very difficult, in 6 African countries, including Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. Yeah, and we'll hear, I think the latest project he's working on focuses not on avoiding deforestation, but on planting new trees, which is easier because of these whole social challenges, at least some of the social challenges we've just heard from Stephen, they don't apply. And I also really am so happy that he's here because he was deeply involved in the very first 2009 carbon project that started in 2009 in Africa and Kenya, and that's where we have engaged together. So I'm really glad that we have Amos with us, telling us from his very deep and very long-term experience with payment for ecosystem services linked to carbon markets. So over to you, Amos.
Thank you so much. I would like just to share a few slides about the experiences of this project, the key features, and the challenges and the lessons learned. You move to the next slide. So these projects, there are key features that we experienced in developing them and implementing and offering carbon credits to communities, smallholder farmers. When you're doing this project, you need to observe opportunities and the land that is eligible for restoration to give food security and also provide livelihood to the communities. You need an approach of collaborative. If you work alone, it's very hard. You need an investor, a project developer, and the communities to implement. Then in terms of additionality, you need finance, you need experts, you need money to break the barriers there and sequester more carbon. The area that you are working should be scalable. You need to scale to other areas. You start small, bringing a few instances, then roll out. You need to use local resources to be cost efficient and technologies. And then you need to provide activities that sequester carbon to be multiple so that farmers don't just focus on carbon credits. And then the policies, when we started projects, the policies were not strong as today because we didn't have climate instruments that we base on. We are just basing on UNFCCC tools and Kyoto Protocol. Next slide. This is the Kenya Agriculture Carbon Project that we started 2009 with finances from World Bank Biocarbon Fund investors. And it was piloted in Western Kenya, area that is potential for agriculture around the Lake Victoria region. That was degraded heavily. We aim to produce with smallholder farmers who are peasant to have food security on the table, but also participate in carbon payments. We used a methodology that was developed because we didn't have a methodology at the moment. So part of the Biocarbon Fund helped us to develop the methodology, which we refer as Sustainable Agricultural Land Management under Vera standard that is already inactive now because there is a new one that has replaced it. These were the practices that farmers choose because they are local, they know them, including soil organic inputs with mulching, compost, and agroforestry. We worked with 45,000 hectares, 60,000 households, aggregated in the groups of 1,700 farmer groups. The yields increased in the first year 20%, and the following year they doubles. And the amount of carbon that was targeted for 30 years was 1.9. Right now, they have already reached 1 million tons and verified 5 times. And farmers get carbon credits, and the trees are there, and other benefits are there. Next. And this is the restoration.
Amos, I suggest you skip the second project and go to the challenges because I think those are of interest.
Okay. And the challenges include the costs of starting the project is high, require an investor. The MRVs, most local areas, they don't have data, national issues. Tools are complicated, technical capacity required. There is the issue of reversal, requires to monitor and also plant more trees to buffer. The issue of certification, getting a standard methodology is difficult and also costly, and some stringent. We have low carbon credits. And policy and standardity, which I've already mentioned. The last one. Lessons learned include governance is an issue. Farmers should be organized in groups. Extension services should be locally and digitalized. Benefit sharing should be aligned to the needs of the farmers. Should have a good business case, which is transparent and inclusive. And then the MRV, you need to pilot and have it be digital, and then be in the context specific. You require to plant more trees so that you buffer, because most trees are used also for other needs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we hope in the Q&A to learn about his current project that focuses more on new tree. So new tree planting, which is really easier to manage to some extent. And also for our online audiences, if you do have questions, please note them down. We have someone in this room who will try to receive them. And so we'll bring in questions both from online and from the audience in the room. But before we come to the Q&A, we have our last speaker. We're moving now to South Asia, to India. Where Dr. Pranab Chowdhury, a founding member of the Center for Land Governance, who also works with the Foundation for Ecological Security, which is an organization that almost all CGR centers have one or another linkage with. And working in these systems, he focuses on policy analysis and capacity building of stakeholders, again, deeply focused with land rights, rural tenure governance, forest rights, livelihoods, and sustainable development. So please, Dr. Pranab, over to you to understand how you are approaching that same topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, CGR and BMZ, IFRI, for providing us this opportunity. This presentation is from the supply side context, mostly from the perspective of the community and commons through the voices of civil society. And we are trying to provide a perspective that we have learned from our last 2 years of closer engagement that includes review of what is happening around the PS market and also looking at what is happening in India, which is resulting into a project that we are trying to implement in 2 states of India. Next slide, please. The way we look at the commons, because here we look at not only the farmers, but also the part-time and full-time forest dwellers, fishers, livestock graziers, who depends on a village ecosystem, which is typically a landscape mosaic, having common land, including pasture, forest, and wetland, interacting with private farmlands. So this whole mixed tenure regime, which remains individual commons, and sometimes also the gap blurring between them when the rain-fed private land we also become commons. We see them interacting with each other in a system, which is really very critical for locating PES discourse, because this system provides livelihood opportunities, which are not only which we see as income streams or economic opportunities in terms of income from the value chains, in employment from the working in these landscapes, as well as cost savings through whole agroecological paradigms where the local watershed services, pollination and nutrition services subsidize the farming and make them resilient. At the same time, we also see additional dividends in terms of certification and PS market coming in. And we believe all these things happen right from pre-production to post-production across the systems. And in a way, if we don't look at the system and try to look at only carbon or only trees, or try to extract something beyond that, it sometimes break the resilience and could be detrimental to the system. So, and generating more externality. So that is how we are having the approach. Next slide, please. We see that when these multiple products and services, and we would like to call them as a bundle of products and services, which also include some types of social and cultural spaces in these forest and pastoral commons that communities and women particularly enjoy, is coming because of particularly 3 kind of connections, which also Steve called about community stewardship. We call them value, where the communities, indigenous communities, particularly local communities, they care the forest and be cared by the forest. They live with the forest, they coexist with these commons and all these ecosystems. They have own governance mechanism, which is based around the local tenure. For example, the Northeast India, where customary community tenure regime still exists and recognized by the constitution. We see that how the feminism, how the gender play a critical role, and how local institutions come in there to decide how these resources will be governed. And at the same time, the traditional knowledge, particularly if you look at forestry, I think it was discussed a little bit earlier, most of the knowledge around agriculture and forestry that were taught in Indian universities are from West. Whereas a lot of local traditional knowledge systems, ethno-silviculture, the way communities tend forest and harvest forest has not been documented. But this has been critical to maintain the forest. For example, in Northeast India, unlike, well, whole India has a 20% of forest cover, Northeastern India maintains a 75% of forest cover in spite of the shifting cultivation practices. we see if we don't look at these three things together and the bundling of ecosystem services, sometimes we'll be having risk. And if we do it together, maybe we can address win-win options like community well-being, commons resilience, and climate action. Next slide, please. So to just make a contest from the field areas that are working in Meghalaya and Odisha, how the system thinking is there. When you look at a forest, the communities just don't look at them as ecosystem services or product. It is their food, medicine, timber, income, watershed, and they also look at forest as a space to have the social and recreational space. But at the same time, we see there has been reducing engagement with forest, with trend among youth particularly to move out and not to continue the generational knowledge. And at the same time, there is an extractive actions like stone quarrying, privatization of timber forest, and state control coming in. In terms of forest people relation, the way they look at pest and wildlife damage is quite revealing, because they feel that they do also have a share and we should share with them. So the whole principle of coexistence remain there. And in terms of governance, not only we see that the governance at as a village level decentralized, but at a multiple village level, we also see a kind of tenure regime where multiple villages access a common space for agriculture or for forest extraction. And we see how there is a community individual tenure continuum, which is partially and temporary, decide the land use, which makes it more resilient. In terms of management, we also see how in Meghalaya, there is a forest pasture farm continuum, and how there is a grassland based shifting cultivation system called Co-Boon, and how they are able to manage the soil quality and soil health while continue to produce food. But we are seeing increasing tenure individualization, knowledge erosion in the next generation, and also weakening of local governance, where state is bringing in new agencies around management. Particularly in that context, the payment for ecosystem service scheme in Meghalaya, which has been recently launched with the savings from World Bank project, we see how copybook forestry projects are being premised under external knowledge and control, and with limited free and prior informed consent, which is risking the local governance, bringing in new management paradigm, weakening local management, and also value system. Similarly, when you look at the, should I stop here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's a very complex set of cases in India where we have these complex societies producing many different ecosystem services. No, but this is excellent, and we will hear more during the Q&A, really focusing on the topics that you as the audience are most interested in. I'd like to invite now our speakers from the room, Marcella, to please join us on the podium, and also Felicitas. My understanding is you had to move to another meeting. So Felicitas, if you could join us, and Marcella, so please. And we have hopefully on the screen, our panelists, Stephen, Pranab, and Amos, to also answer your questions. And we have a roving microphone or two in the room. And of course, we have also online questions. But I suggest we start with questions in the room. Some of the takeaways just for me were definitely the additionality question. And then the, coming in with approaches that are approved. And for example, for carbon market payments, there's some very specific standards, specific practices, but then they clash with local stewardship and local management practices. That's on the forest or carbon market side. And then of course we have the earlier systems where you like plant some trees upstream and you improve, reduce sedimentation for hydroelectricity production. Those also have their own challenges. So all of them have challenges, all of them have opportunities. So over to you. Okay, someone already has a mic, so we'll start with that. And please also introduce your name and organization and your question, please.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. My name is Imga Jordan, Alliance Biodiversity International in Seattle. I do have a challenge with all the presentations. Looking into coming from a different sector of home economic sciences, where household work also is not funded. Now, ecosystem service is also a social service where we serve a community, we serve our own family part of livelihood. I'm wondering how we do the quality assurance here of that particular service, which we want to gratify, where we want to pay for. So within the family, we have our family members who say it's nice. Now, when it comes to ecosystem service, who is valuing this service?
Yeah.
And how do we monitorize it in this way that we pay it?
MRV, I think good. We have a question in front. And then we'll see what other questions we have. Also, if you have a specific person you would like to address your question, feel free to mention that.
Hello, everyone. Christoph Garnert, Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and University of Kassel. I have a question. So I think we have seen nicely these case studies around the globe, and I think that's all very helpful to have them in place. But I think also what we need is a much bigger approach to get these services adapted really on a regular basis and to be implemented not only on single case studies, but on a widespread mode. And I would like to ask you all, on what kind of mechanisms do you see to really get this to a widespread implementation that we are, and where should the money come from? Because I think we see this also in the climate debate with the Bridgetown Initiative, for instance, that there are mechanisms to bring money to these bigger initiatives which fund these kind of services, but I guess this is also still needed for these ecosystem services, right?
Okay, there was a long question. So you're asking the source of finance or the mechanism for scaling, or both? Both. Okay, good. Maybe one more question? Or, okay, there's a gentleman in the middle. And then we'll check if we have some online questions. Oh, there was a gentleman in the back and there's a gentleman in the middle. Okay.
So hello, David Baxter from Helvetas Intercorporation GmbH, also speaking on behalf of Helvetas Swiss Intercorporation. And my question is quickly, what do you think need to be the minimum safeguards to put in place to prevent that the potential negative effects of weakening local governments are not happening? So what the basically safeguard minimum criteria to avoid negative risks actually becoming reality?
And that's negative social outcomes, or
economic, social, political. I mean, there's a whole set of potential risks.
Okay, as we'll do a sweep of people in the room, there was a gentleman here and no, but the gentleman here in the, just be in front of the gate here or whatever.
Hello, my name is Kanzorik. I'm from Mongolia. I was interested in two questions. The first one is for Marcela. What do you know any studies focusing on like analyzing what is the success percentage of these PES schemes in the world? Maybe in
Sorry, that question was for Marcela?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the second question is it's a bit sometimes complexity that for example the person who is sometimes beneficiary of the ecosystem services that they have to pay. Sometimes these people are also a provider of the ecosystem services. So, for example, a herder in Mongolia, that sometimes the governments think that they are the beneficiary because they use the grassland. But sometimes, in the other hand, they are also people who protect the land from other activities. So, in such case, is how this complexity with its beneficiary or provider tackled in these PES schemes. Thank you.
So who should answer the second?
Maybe again, Marcela.
Oh, Marcela, okay.
Thank
Mongolian
you.
herder systems, good. Yes, I think we'll hand over to our respondents, and we have respondents also obviously online, but as we have Marcela proposed to answer a couple of questions, I'll hand over my mic and so we have MRV, financial mechanism scaling, minimum safeguards, social safeguards, success rate, and the Mongolian example.
Okay, good. So let me start with yours that are more also fresher in my mind. So the last one was on, when is the beneficiary is the user. And there was something in the definition that to me is key, and is that it's easier when these payment for ecosystem services are around externalities. So it's around an environmental effect that is produced by someone and affects someone, and whoever is get affected is not part of the decision that is delivering the ecosystem services. So when we talk about externalities, you don't have the problem that is the same person. At least is the same owner of the grassland that benefit from the ecosystem service and the land that is also providing the ecosystem service. But if you focus on the externalities, you don't have that problem a lot. And this is especially in the watershed services, which I'm more familiar with. And the other question was on the success percentage. Yes, on the studies that I have seen more recently, mainly from Borner and from Sven Vander, there are not many impact evaluations, but the few ones are showing some percentages of success. For example, percentage on reducing the deforestation rate in Mexico or in Costa Rica. So there is success in most of the cases that has been documented now with impact assessment, but that percentage of success is very relevant at the local level, but at the national scale probably is not that relevant, because you reduce, for example, the deforestation in a given municipality and it's relevant there, but when you put that at the scale of the country, probably not that relevant. So this is mainly what the numbers are saying, basically. For forest conservation. From other services like water services, I think this is a big gap, knowing exactly what is being delivered in terms of watershed services.
Okay. Thank you. I will take the question from Christoph Gornert. Thank you very much for the question, which was about mechanisms for scale and also the sustainability in funding. These are exactly the 2 points that we're trying to address with the compensation initiative. So one thing is the mechanism for scale. So we are trying to design projects ideally that are add-on projects to already existing schemes where we can, where a large amount of farmers are already being reached, where a functioning mechanism exists, where we then can add a payment for ecosystem schemes component. That is one thing. But then, of course, with regards to the funding, we really also want to explore different sources of financing. And here we're working on a variety of pilot projects. One, of course, where we just provide our ODA money, our overseas development aid funds that are then being spent, but that's not sustainable in the long term. So we are now working with a project together with the Rabobank, where we want to provide our funds as a first loss equity to leverage significant amounts of private sector capital to then finance the initial setup of agroforestry schemes. That's one thing. And then in the third area that we're also working together with the World Bank, we paid into the Food Systems 2030 Trust Fund, where we are actually promoting the agenda of repurposing agriculture subsidies. So agriculture subsidies are actually a multi-billion opportunity for food systems transformation. And we're working with the World Bank here to see how public government money at national level, so agriculture subsidies, can also be used, set up as funding sources for payment for ecosystem services schemes at a national level. So here there's like all different sorts of funding sources that we're looking at. And of course, then they are both ticking the box of reaching scale because it's set up in an institutional environment, and they have sustainable funding sources behind.
Excellent. So we'll move now to our online presenters to answer the questions that are not yet answered. One is on the minimum social safeguards and one on MRV. I know Amos has a lot of experience with MRV systems, measurement systems, and social safeguards. I think all of you can cover. So, but let's start with Amos with MRV and maybe his experience on social safeguards, and then Stephen and Pranab probably can also come in on that. So please, over to you, Amos.
On social safeguards, we follow the environmental standards or carbon international standards, which have a lot of social safeguards in the process of developing the project. And locally also, farmers have participatory approaches in terms of community engagement, stakeholder engagement, and consenting. Decision-making is done locally by the communities, and laws are also provided to safeguard the communities. So there are a lot of safeguards, and also projects are in line with sustainable development goals So there are many social safeguards and environmental safeguards in place in this project. It MRVs to make it context specific to the community, make sure that is can be applied within the community, can be digital also. I think that's what has made it robust and reduce the costs. And also the social modeling. For example, the soil carbon project, we could not do direct measurement because the money will be over and there will be no extra money to monitor. So we used modeling approaches like the Rothschild model. Thank you.
And Amos, as we have you talking right now, can you tell me, let's say in your latest carbon project where you're planting trees, so it's not avoided deforestation, and so how much does a farmer get per hectare per year or over 10 years? If you could just give us a number, I think that would be useful for the audience.
That's the. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We would like to pay farmers like $6 to $10. That is the money which can help them to be motivated to plant more trees and maintain them for a long period of time. So we are introducing new trees in the new areas, and we are using forestation, reforestation, revegetation approaches. So the prices of carbon also motivates farmers to plant, and some also pre-financed so that they are motivated and later they are paid and compensated, and they have other multiple benefits for either like cocoa farming, they process cocoa for export, and for other standards which are organic cocoa. So it's like a multiple benefits, and carbon is co-benefit to that.
Yeah, so we often call it charismatic carbon. So the carbon payment itself is extremely low. We talk about 1 hectare. So the co-benefits from extension services, other livelihood opportunities that are coming with those schemes are actually the ones that transform, can contribute to resilience of food systems. So I think it was good to hear that. And maybe Stephen or Pranab, do you want to say a bit more on social safeguards before we hand over to our online questions? Okay, please.
I'd like to say a few words about Pranab.
Okay.
Let me say a few words about safeguards. Very important question, but we have to ask, I think, a more basic question of safeguards against what? And typically we're taking account of potential harm that accompanies an intervention, and that's to say it's problematic, because once again the interventions are being designed on the basis of assumptions about what people need to improve their management. And so the best way one way of addressing the safeguard question is to more directly think in terms of an investment approach. That is investing in what people need and what they say they need, and not just in terms of pursuit of ecological outcomes, but social outcomes as well. A strong community will be more effective stewards, and that's how they engage with their environment. Is we're managing our livelihoods in the context of this environmental system. So here's how you can help us. I think that's the best way to anticipate or sort of mitigate the risk of interventions having negative impacts locally.
Okay, yeah, very, very, very important point, and I think also essential for the whole resilience aspect, and potentially for you can strengthen communities and their governance, maybe their institutions. Pranab, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. See, in the present market, based on our review, particularly carbon market context, we see safeguards are more around market. So if you look at the integrity, quality concerns, they're more around ensuring additionality, leakage, and permanence, and less around environmental justice and local social issues. Though if you find this IVCI, VCMI, this 9 core principles. So you see in only one principle they're talking about safeguard. Even similarly, that Microsoft has coming with high quality CDR and also WWF. So where we see there is an intent being shown to a limited extent around ensuring the safeguards. For example, this Plan Vivo in new stream talking about 60% share to the community of the carbon market. But the way we see, and I think Amos was telling also, we see around 20 to 30% price is coming to the community. And also community tenures, community governance is hardly ensured. So present market we see is more tilted towards ensuring investors' concern and market concern than the community concern. So which probably something we need to work upon and see how communities' concerns are integrated into the market.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that is good so that we have, if every project has to show that they have improved social outcomes, community coherence, and that communities' concerns are addressed and not just the environmental concerns. That seems to be important criteria. We move to online questions, and I think Charlotte Hebelbrand is going to read those for us.
Thanks, Claudia. We have a few questions coming in from the IFPRI platform. So the first one is from Sadar Siddiqui from Pakistan, from Park, who's asking, I mean, obviously you all are talking about smallholder schemes, but nonetheless, the question is, how does it vary with regard to farm size? Is there a critical size that works better for PES? And then we have quite a few questions on carbon, not surprisingly. Julius Kostis, who's a senior scientist with systems thinking, pricing carbon seems to be a difficult task. How do we price carbon? And then there's a lot of related questions on carbon. I'm not going to read all of them. Nick Norbell, who's an economist working with a couple of donor-funded projects, is asking, how do you manage the time lag? If I plant new trees, actual carbon offset will not happen for some years. Can credits be paid out simply to fund inputs and technical assistance activities rather than the higher goal of carbon removal? And related to that, how do you exclude projects which are not reducing carbon, but aim to get credits by not cutting or not polluting, which are not actually in the spirit of carbon reduction programs? And then there was one other very interesting question. Yes, this one comes from Francis Matu, a researcher and agronomist, who's wondering, he talks about the industry, but I think he's talking about the providers of these schemes. How can we most effectively and quickly address the most vulnerable communities being affected by climate change related challenges? So who's deciding where to put these schemes into place? And then if I may, a last question from me for all the speakers. I think we all know that there are now voluntary markets in the quote unquote global north, which are actually providing, I think, quite significant transfers of resources to farmers. So how do you feel about that? And what is the disparity here between the global north and the global south? Thank you very much.
I think very good question, including the last one, because the largest in terms of volume and everything, PS schemes are actually in the global north, US, EU, etc. I mean, they have a lot of programs that would fall under the generic payment for ecosystem service scheme, US Conservation Reserve Program, etc. Tons of money has been, a lot of money has been paid to farmers, but somehow, as usual, we have more challenges, more complexity, smallholder farmers in low-income countries. Okay, so we got some very interesting questions. Critical farm size. What's the minimum farm size to make a system work? Obviously, the focus of this particular event is on smallholder farmers because we specifically want to do both environmental and income or poverty reduction outcomes. And that's exactly probably one of the reasons why EU and US schemes, they deal with very large farms. And I think there's also some obviously gradient in terms of who benefits and who doesn't. Is there a critical farm size, or any farmer with one tree could participate? Who wants to take that online? Amos, maybe? Because
I can say we designed the project to even meet the landless. The smallest size is 0.5 hectares. And to 20 Those are smallholder farmers we've experienced with. But we also designed to meet the landless, to include the landless, those who can produce nurseries, those who can sell products like nature-based products. Farmers can also bring their farms together and register as one farm. Many farmers can come together communally and register their farms. So it's about enjoying the landscape ecosystem services rather than individualizing them. Thank you.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Farmers coming together, and those whose farms are too small, they do the tree nurseries. So you and ancillary benefits. Can you also take the time lag? I think the point was that the carbon benefits take years to accrue when you plant trees, but the farmers don't want to wait for 20 or 10 years to actually get their $4 per hectare. So how do you handle the time lag in the tree planting projects? Amos, sorry.
Yes,
So
in that case, we blend the project to have a business case, to have incomes, livelihoods, and trees. And then there are trees that are mixed, short-term benefits, long-term benefits. And also the trees also offer non-tree product benefits. So farmers will be, you need to make a case that farmers get money other than carbon money, more than even carbon money. So in the first 5 years of investment of the project, still farmers will be reaping income annually. And in the 20 years, you develop a project, a business of either cooperative or a group association, or link them with the off-taker and a company or a milk enterprise so that they get more benefit. They focus on them as they maintain trees for 30 to 50 years.
I actually also want to say something to the timeline question. It's one of the challenges that we're also very interested in how to resolve. And our collaboration that we're starting with the Rubber Bank, I think is a very interesting one here, because the newly set up smallholder agroforestry finance is addressing this issue precisely by providing loans to farmers. And because they're usually so high at risk, our investment is used as this first loss equity. So we basically de-risk the investment for other investors to provide the loans to the farmers, who can then pre-finance the transition to agroforestry systems. And then once the carbon certification scheme kicks in and they receive the payments from it, a share is deducted from that, which then pays back the loan. And that's basically the idea to fund the transition to these agroforestry schemes at scale.
Perfect. There was also a question on how can we give credits for not polluting, and I guess water is a key source there. So there's a lot of PS schemes around preserving water resources. Kenya Water Fund, the schemes, a lot of them in Latin America. And even the Environmental Trust in Malawi, I think there's a lot to reduce erosion that would affect hydroelectric productivity. Marcela, that's your area also. So can you just say a few words, how do farmers who avoid polluting water resources, I think specifically, how can they get money or other benefits from such schemes?
I think that's a quick question, and it's related with the presentation of Steve when he touched base on this issue of the additionality, right, in the carbon projects, where you have to demonstrate that that forest was on risk to then receive a payment. But for those that have like a good behavior in terms of forest conservation, then do not apply for carbon credits. So I think that's an issue, and it's something that has not been resolved in the case of carbon markets. In the case of water services, there is a case, I was very involved in Peru, and we had that conversation a lot in the country with the government and with local organizations. And then one of the main points is that why people that are not making an effort to conserve are not rewarding for that. So in that moment, the government made a decision to make this new law that I mentioned, that actually that law is not called law for ecosystem services, but it's a law for rewarding for ecosystem services.
Oh.
So it's to also recognize the good behavior of those that are conserving the areas that are producing water. So that's one way on how that was resolved for that specific case, but every country is taking a different approach, right? And if you go to the concepts that I showed at the beginning, those theories are going to say, oh, this is not efficient, right? Because you are just paying for something that is already being delivered. So what is the additionality and so on? But I think it's also a matter of reciprocity. And that's why I was putting that in my first slide.
Yes, can I say something in response to Marcelo? Can I add something to Marcelo?
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. No, I appreciate Marcelo pointing out the Costa Rica example, and I sort of my concluding argument is that you know, we really, I think, at a point where we've got some other ideas out there that enable us to think about how to, say, re-engineer payment regimes in ways that reward, I'm using that word, reward conservers, okay? Because this is being overlooked. What people have achieved by virtue of their long-term investments, the management capacity that they've developed over, you know, many decades, the investments that they've made really needs to be recognized. And on the other side, incentivizing people or context or communities where there are some apparently systemic issues around conservation and management, those communities may lack the social institutional kind of conditions to actually respond to an incentive. And when they do, as you pointed out, Marcelo, once the money's gone, it's the end of the story. You know, there's a reversion in many settings to past practice. So I think a rethinking that really, and we've heard other examples about what that rethinking might involve. It would involve investment as the key term, as opposed to payments. Let's invest in local social capacity to manage resources and for community well-being. And we see a case in Maasai territory in Kenya, where what people wanted in the context of a Red Plus project, they wanted better schools for their children, sanitary facilities for the school kids. That's very much related to persistence to coming to school. Okay, so that's an investment in social well-being that will pay off in terms of environmental and other kinds of benefits. Thank you.
And just to add one thing, it's a super interesting question, and one that also concerns us under the compensation initiative is really this. We have those areas where a business case exists, where like the carbon credit schemes work, and then we have those where there isn't a business case, and that's where public money has to come in, and that's really the debate that we want to lead. So it's a very interesting example that you're giving of where there was a policy designed to reward ecosystem services, and that's exactly what we also want to have more of a discussion about. How can this work? And that's where we think, for example, this whole repurposing public agriculture support also has to play a key role to think about where can we reward these kind of activities, where can we reward biodiversity conservation, for example, soil health, keeping lands intact and so forth. So that's exactly the debate we need to lead.
And Stephen, given C4's heavy involvement in carbon markets and carbon payments linked to tropical forests, did you want to say something about or answering some of those specific carbon questions?
Yes, the voluntary market question is very important. And this is where a lot of the funding is going. It's private funding. And it's kind of the Wild West, if you know what I mean. It's sort of like there's a lot of cowboys out there. And, you know, I'm seeing some things, and Amos, I'm just thinking of Zambia here, with a recent news report that Zambia was setting aside a significant area percentage of the country's area for offsetting in return for payments by, I think, a Gulf state. So there are some offsetting issues in the Gulf, as we're aware, as there are elsewhere in the world. And I was concerned about that. Well, in my mind, issues arise, and particularly on the social side. Is a large area of land that's where there are currently people using the land going to be kind of locked up? Will people be displaced? Will they be rewarded? And so that's an example. I don't know if Amos is in a position to comment, but so we need to be alert to, once again, the social impacts, because people manage for social and ecological purposes. Obviously, I'm emphasizing that. And so.
Perfect. Amos, did you want to comment on Zambia? And if not, we have a quick second round of questions in the room. Because do you work in Zambia?
I had actually the internet. What was the question from Stephen?
He mentioned that there's a potential project where Zambia sets aside part of its country's area as a carbon offset to some emissions that are happening in the Gulf Cooperation countries, in one or many of them. Are you aware of that project? Of that proposal?
Not really. I worked in Zambia only for 6 months. Well, the major problem was the minerals in those forests. So government has set aside that land for mineral to mine in future, because they're also getting Chinese companies to come and mine. So when you do RED projects in those areas, you may face some challenges from that. But the case Stephen is raising, I'm not aware about it.
Okay. Yeah, we had earlier, of course, similar, programs with biofuels. This reminds me of some of those earlier programs. So let's, very quick round, last round. And I think I would like everyone also who now responds to tell us a bit about what should be the research agenda. I think, with climate change, environmental degradation, we need to do things better. But I think what we've heard here, it's a lot of, I think, frustration and some optimism, but really not. We're not talking about we are not going to achieve the level of change that we want to achieve the way we're currently operating. That is at least the message I hear. We keep trying, we seem to want to get better, but some of those very recent reports, of greenwashing and even some indigenous populations being negatively affected, the social safeguards, because those cowboys from the West are coming in and, are able to sell credits, and they're not able to, to work with existing systems. And then if the existing systems work, there's no rewards. So what does all of that leave us with? So I think we don't have the final answer here, but I think so given all of that, what is the research agenda? So that's, I guess, my question to everyone, but we'll also take a few more final questions. I see one question here and two here, and okay, here. Please short, because you've already asked.
Yes, thank you. I actually have two questions, very short one. What is about ecosystem services in urban areas when we look into that the urbanization process is ongoing and more than 50% of the population is done?
Clear, very clear.
The second one is a governance one. If the governments are changing, they may even take off the policy of preventing environmental damage. How do we deal with this?
Look at Brazil. Okay, Stefan, and then over there.
There's currently this change in project design, a trend in research on living labs, and I would like the real life experiments, and I would really go for it. And would like to ask you, what do you think? I think it is really that we have to change our mind also towards not testing in doing this project design what we always have in a traditional way. I think we have to open our mind and the inclusion of people in real life experiments would be a lot better, and I don't see it that often also in the research agenda.
Yeah, very good point. FES and Pranab, that's what they're doing all the time, but we need to do more of those. we have two questions over there. Yeah.
Thank you. After what has been said yesterday,
Please, your name and.
my name is Daniel Gallo Concha. I come from Kaiserslautern und Bonn. After what has been said yesterday about complexity many times, after what our colleagues have mentioned also about complexity and what Claudia has wrapped up, seems that the obvious thing is methodological. Why is not the methodological thing obvious in the agendas of the doers, of the actors? Why? It's well known that the only way to address complexity is through systemic approaches, or there are systemic tools to do that. Why is not in the agenda? I'm very curious. Thanks.
Okay. Because it's complex, that's why. But the other, sorry, behind you. And then the very last one, and then we really have to stop questions.
Hi, thank you. Eva Goldman from FIBA, Research Institute of Organic Agriculture, Switzerland. My question goes to Stephen and Felicitas. Well, when we look at these recent very negative reports on Vera or West, all these things, I am wondering what can be done to ensure that, leaving complexity aside, these carbon offsetting programs are actually able to achieve simple, quantifiable carbon results, whether there's a way outside of just stronger political regulations or stronger scientific validation of these approaches that are used.
Yeah. And there was one very last one right here.
Yes, hello, my name is Claudia Redi from TH Köln. And I have one question, because the term biodiversity popped up at some times. And I remember a very old publication by GIZ, Payment for Ecosystems for Biodiversity Conservation. And today we did not hear so much about lessons learned with that. But is it not, especially for agricultural purposes, if we want to transform, should we not better consider that? So we spoke of conservation in terms of water, in terms of carbon, but I heard then that there was one plan to better consider also biodiversity conservation in these planned activities. But I think it would be really nice if you would hear more about payment for ecosystem services for biodiversity conservation.
Mm-hmm.
It's complex, it's not easy to measure, but would be great.
Yeah, I guess one thing is if you focus on carbon, soil carbon, trees, water, take care of some biodiversity. But yeah, I'm not aware of the publication, so I'm not sure if Felicitas, no, maybe not. Yeah, but it's still, I think it's a research agenda as well. Okay, oh, good. So we have our final answer round, and this is your last chance also to bring in research agenda. You can start with the biodiversity one, urban, ecosystem services, what happens if governments change, systemic risks, systemic modeling given these interconnected situations. Feel free to address what you can address in 1 minute, 1.5.
Thank you for the additional half. No, there are payment for ecosystem services. I mean, focusing on biodiversity, mainly in Africa, they are documented. So there are, but yeah, but there is more prominence on water and carbon. And also I'm aware of one case that is about paying for agrobiodiversity. And that was recognizing the conservation of native potatoes in the Andes in Latin America. So there are some cases, but yes, are not the more prominent ones. Regarding, I wanted to make a comment regarding the public versus private sources of funding. I think it's an important conversation because what we have seen in the practice is that many payment for ecosystem services that reach maturity, they started with private support. So private support or support from international cooperation that kind of absorb that first loss. And that was important to start triggering the process and understand how to put this up. But then the public funding became very important to give sustainability and recurrency of in the payments. So that's why it's important to start seeing how we can unlock public funding in specific countries, depending on the different financial instruments that they have to put into payment for ecosystem services to give more permanence to the payments that are given to the farmers.
Thank you. Regarding the question on the recent reports on the criticism on designs like Bera, we've of course also seen that, and there it's about really making sure that you're designing your programs using the highest certification schemes that really focus on avoiding these kind of mishaps. I think there's a lot of challenges in how to implement and correctly set up carbon certification schemes that actually work, and you can also do a lot of things wrong. We have an experience with a carbon certification project in Eastern Africa, where we also published lessons learned on how to avoid mishaps in these programs. And I think that's the first publication I would like to point you to. And yeah, it's really about the biggest standards, the best standards out there that you ensure these don't happen.
Excellent. And so the last points from our online participants also, either comment on one of the questions or tell us, one research area that we have to focus on to overcome these challenges that we've heard about. Who wants to start? Pranab, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly responding to biodiversity thing. Just recently, Vera is finalizing a biodiversity credit theme they call nature credit. We are looking at 1 hectare of area around biodiversity 0 to 1 scale. So people can look at that where the biodiversity market is coming up. Regarding the research agenda, particularly the way we are working with FES is trying to see if we can bring in some kind of community or supply side things into through participatory action research, particularly the way, the point around additionality for the conservers, how we ensure that, how we look at most of the methodology that Vera used or Plan Vivo used are developed by, again, a colonial mindset and a knowledge mindset which is not local. So I think this methodology needs to be also revisited, and can you have methodologies which is looking at local silviculture, which is looking at in the context of forest, local practices and management practices. Similarly, MRV and building local capacity, because in many cases we see a fair share is not coming to community because most of the consultant and intermediaries which have crowded the market like cowboys, they are taking out bigger share. So how can we enhance more share to the community? How can we involve community in developing methodologies from their knowledge system? And how can we ensure that when communities conserve the forest, this would be treated as additionality? I think these are some research questions we are looking at. Thank you.
Excellent research agenda. So Amos and Steve, you have 1 sentence each, please. Yeah.
Go ahead, Amos.
We would like research in carbon, in not only in carbon, but benefit sharing, because there's not much research there you can go and look for and know which one is the best benefit sharing mechanism. So those are the challenges we have in place.
Excellent. And Steve?
Yeah, I think we have to remind ourselves that this architecture of PES is designed to serve emitters and not those who are asking to actually sequester carbon. We have to turn that all upside down. And we start by really confronting our biases. We actually don't have confidence in what people do in managing their forests. And so we, create these incentives and so on that give us confidence that they're going to do the right thing, when in fact they're doing the right thing most of the time. And so I'm suggesting really a focus on investment in helping people do what they're doing. If it evolves at some point to local interest in set-aside programs, that's fine. And there can be enough efforts to facilitate that, but we should really have an investment approach based on an understanding of these are socio-ecological systems.
Perfect, which gets us back to the systems approach. And with that, we're closing this second CGR seminar on food system resilience. I think it's an important aspect, PS schemes, but there's still a lot to be done. So thanks to everyone in the audience. Thanks to all of our speakers in person, online, for this excellent discussion today. With that, we close this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hemos empezado.